My name is Steve Zeltzer. I'm a member of the United Front Committee for a Labor Party, and also I'm a member of the CWA Pacific Media Workers Guild in San Francisco. And the recent struggles, particularly last May, around the
attack on Palestinians
has led to a major increase in support in the labor movement, unions around the country, for Palestinians, against U.S. military and economic aid to Israel, and also challenging the position of the AFL-CIO, which has a relationship with the Histadrut, the Israeli Zionist Israeli Trade Union Federation, and has been active in supporting the policies of Israel for decades. In fact, Golda Meir, who is a founder, one of the founders of Israel, her statue is in the AFL-CIO headquarters. So there's a long history of collaboration, support by the AFL-CIO, including Israeli bonds, which one of our panelists are going to talk about today. So we wanted to, so that last development in May by the Zionists, the Israeli state, has led to an upsurge, really the largest upsurge in the labor movement in the United States in support of the Palestinians and Palestinian movement. And it has also led to trade unionists beginning to learn about the Histadrut, beginning to learn about the AFL-CIO's relationship with the Histadrut, and why the AFL-CIO has been silent about the basically the prison in Gaza and basically a slave labor condition of Palestinians, of discrimination and the treatment by Israel. So we wanted to have this panel today to get some of this history and the present struggles out and experiences at the CWA and at AFT. And joining us are Stanley Heller, is a retired president of AFT 1547. He's host of The Struggle, which is a TV show, and he's covered extensively the struggle of the Palestinian movement. Also joining us is Lisa Milos, who's a member, rank and file member of AFT, or UPTE, United Professional Technical Employees at UCSF, and she's also a delegate to the San Francisco Labor Council, and was able to get a resolution before the CWA Resolutions Committee on that issue. And also joining us is Carol Lang, who's a member of the Professional Staff Congress of the AFT in New York City, and has been involved in a resolution that was passed and the blowback by the Zionists to that resolution, which has not only taken place in New York, but in other parts of the country where there's been a fight back against any of these resolutions. So welcome to this program. So I want to talk first, go to Stanley Heller, because there's been actually a long history of struggle in the unions, of unionists for the AFL-CIO to take this up, the labor movement to take this up, and he's been involved in that struggle. So welcome, Stanley.
Well, I started teaching in 1969 and got active in the union. I was president of that local in West Haven, Connecticut, from 73 to 1980, and then vice president for a year in what was then called the Connecticut Federation of Teachers. My only involvement in those years about Palestine was to go to a trade union weekend at UConn and to hear how great things were in Israel and how strong the Histadrut was and how envious we should be and so on and so forth. Now, after 1981, I didn't hold any union office, but I was on the New Haven Labor Council for another till 2011. And was sometimes elected to the state AFL-CIO and the national AFT events, to their conventions. But I didn't wake up about Palestine until 1982. And then after that invasion of Lebanon in 1982 and the Sabra Shatila massacre, I did get active. And my wife and I and others organized the Middle East Crisis Committee, and it still exists, and I'll put a couple of the links in the chat for others. Of course, we started it long before websites, but all right, those are a couple things that get to our website. After a while, we produced some flyers about the mistreatment of Palestinian workers and their unions at MEC events. One I remember in particular, it was about Palestinians who worked inside of Israel and stayed overnight. That was illegal. And the police came around, but the employer said, well, look, why don't we have a kind of a compromise? What if we lock them up and overnight, and then we know they can't go out and do anything bad to Jewish people? How about that? And so the police agreed. And all this came out when there were fires and people burned to death because they couldn't get out of their homes. So we did have flyers, and a couple times we went to the AFL-CIO Convention in Connecticut, and they let us have a table, and we had some literature about unions. And then once websites started, we did look up a number of things and have links to various information about unions, and I'll put that link up in the chat also. And that's fairly up to date. At a state labor convention in Connecticut in 2006, I was looking at the budget and noticed $25,000 in bonds, Israel bonds. Now, there was no other country that they had invested bonds in. And I asked some searching, and well, the president decided they were rather hostile questions. And I got some kind of answers. But the interesting thing is I did get a couple of allies, a machinist leader who knew about Palestine, and we started working together on some of these issues. And we started campaigning to get the state federation to sell off the bonds. We also started looking at investments of the state of Connecticut in Israel bonds and other securities. This was basically state employee pension money that they were sending over to Israel. So we would write to the state pension board and ask them how much they had and what they were investing in, and could they get rid of these investments? And they were very polite. They would tell us what they had. And no, these are, the treasurer determined this was a good thing to invest in. So at present, this year, Connecticut has 85 million in Israel bonds and stocks in Israeli companies and Israel shekels in terms of currency. In 2011, we were able to persuade the New Haven Labor Council to pass a resolution calling on the Connecticut treasurer to sell off Israel bonds. And then in 2010, after 4 years of effort, we got the state AFL-CIO to cash in its Israel bonds. And that was the year I retired from teaching. I also heard about a group called Labor for Palestine, and they've been doing good work for quite some time. I'll put their link into the chat. And in 2011, we heard about an event honoring the head of the New York State AFL-CIO. It was being held by the Israel Bonds Committee because of all the good work he did in getting unions to buy the bonds. He was also on the Federal Reserve, by the way. He was the head of it. This is during 2006, 7, 8. This is the housing collapse. And no one could ever think of anything he had ever done for working people as the head of the Federal Reserve. At any rate, we picketed against the place in New York City that was holding the the event for him, big banner and so on, which was good. Now, once I retired, I had no real access to union meetings or to the Labor Council, really. I didn't know it, but a man named John Fussell in Connecticut, a former 1199 vice president and a labor lawyer for the Teamsters and other unions, started doing activism with unions about Palestinians. He organized a delegation of union members to visit Palestine, Israel. And it was a real wake-up call for many of them, including John Olson, who had been the state AFL-CIO president for decades and had visited Israel many times. He never got this kind of a visit. And he became a supporter of Palestinian rights. In fact, a number of Irish American union leaders were involved, and John Fussell thinks they were influenced by the Irish trade unions, which have been supportive in general for Palestinian rights. Fussell got a union leader from one of the Palestinian unions to come to the United States and speak at a Connecticut State AFL-CIO Convention, which was quite something. He had to make a compromise, though, for balance. They also included Stuart Applebaum of the Jewish Labor Committee, who spoke. But he wasn't confrontational and was fairly innocuous in the things he had said. Then around that time, UE, their national union, passed a resolution in favor of BDS. So then 2015 comes and there's a state convention in Connecticut. And this was sort of the height of support for Palestinians. A resolution was introduced by the Machinists at the state AFL-CIO convention, calling for the national to support BDS against Israel. And it passed by a solid majority. My own role on that was slight, but I did write what I think was a good article on TruthDig, summarizing what had happened. And I'm going to put a link to that in the chat. I called it a game changer, very optimistic, and I was a bit naive because Trumka came down hard against the state federation. You know, he called them up or he wrote them and he blasted them. He didn't say anything was wrong with the resolution, but his attitude was, how dare you little people make a resolution on foreign policy? That's a preserve of we high mucky mucks. We'll do that work and we'll tell you what to say about foreign policy. At the same time, the Jewish Federation and members of the Connecticut Congressional Delegation complained to the AFL-CIO. On the other hand, the Jewish Voice for Peace got a letter signed by 5,000 people in support of the resolution. But the state AFL-CIO leaders completely folded, and Palestine has not been brought up there in the years since. A number of union activists who had been involved with that resolution retired. Fussell still continues working for Palestine among unions, in particular support for the McCallum bill, the Betty McCallum bill that would take away aid from Israel to the extent that it uses money to persecute children. And that's HR 2590. And he was able to, just checking on the time, I'm still good. He was able to get 10 union organizations and 50 non-union organizations to sign up a support statement for the legislation. Interestingly, mostly Teamsters and construction unions. But eventually the effort hit a wall, and he says there hasn't been any signers for a while. Not one of Connecticut's members of Congress have signed up as a sponsor of that bill. Well, AFL-CIO Chief Richard Trumka died suddenly this summer. His job was filled by Liz Schuler of the IBEW. On September 28th, she got the talk. Randy Weingarten and Schuler met with Labor Party Chairwoman Merav Michaeli, and she was told all she needs to know about Israel and Palestine. Labor, as you know, is in the ruling settler coalition. I had an old-time friend who said the worst thing that happened to labor was brought in by the CIO, the idea that labor should get heavily involved in Democratic Party politics. I don't know if the CIO was really at fault, but it has been a disaster. I don't think we should be lobbying Democrats and endlessly trying to meet with members of Congress. I'm more for picketing them and denouncing them and running independents against them. And then when we get strong enough, they can come and try to get meetings with us. And that's my remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stanley, for that useful presentation. I'm sure most trade unions in the United States don't have any idea about that history about in the struggle in the AFL-CIO. It's not new. And you and others in Connecticut have been taking it up for some time. So our next speaker is Carol Lang, and Carol was involved in supporting a resolution in Professional Staff Congress.
Hi there.
So good.
Before I put on my PSC hat, I was in DC 37, which is the largest municipal union in New York City, and I was a delegate to the union. And after the massacres in Shaba and Shatila, I went as a delegate to the union. I did some studying about where the Israeli money, DC 37 was investing in Israeli bonds. And it turns out that those bonds were going to build Jewish schools that denounce Muslims and Palestinians and Arabs in general. So those schools were providing this hate that has been incessantly building in Israel over over all the years. But it's like it's in such a pitch in Israel now that, I mean, a number of those people are really close to being fascist, in my opinion. So now that I'm in the Professional Staff Congress, I'm on the international committee where we're supposed to write resolutions about, international events. This committee is a very mixed bag, to say the least. But, as soon as the bombs started to drop, we wrote a resolution condemning Israel and the murder of, Palestinians. And unfortunately, the protocol is you take it to the EC, and of course, knowing full well that the EC is very conservative, they voted the thing down. But not only did they vote it down, but they rewrote it in such a way that doesn't even tell anybody that Israel was bombing the daylights out of the Palestinians. And so the next step was to go to the delegate assembly. And so before it went to the delegate assembly, what we decided to do, a bunch of us, some on the IC, some just independent, people who were supporters of the Palestinians, we amended it. We wrote amendments to the EC's resolution on the conflict. And with the time that we had, most of those resolutions, amendments passed. And so the resolution became, we have to talk about BDS, and this is the slaughter. And it became much more anti-Israel and, pro-Palestinian in a very overt way. And it passed overwhelmingly. That the vote was something like 82 to 34 or something like that. So as soon as that happened, it was like a bomb went off at the union, because the EC couldn't believe it. And the Zionists were like on steroids at that point. They were writing letters to the most reactionary New York newspapers, the New York Post. They were taking pictures of people who were voting for the resolution in the delegate assembly, and sending us off saying, look at what these teachers are doing. You know, they're corrupting the minds of the students by supporting this resolution. And it went on, and then there were like a bunch of people at the City University, Zionists, who wrote letters saying, we're leaving the union. I mean, they lose a vote and then that's it. Then they think that because now I'm sure people must know about the Janus decision, but if not, the Janus decision was a national decision saying that unions were no longer allowed to collect agency shop fees. So this was a disaster. If people were going to leave the union, it would have meant that they were going to take the money with them. The union isn't particularly concerned about the members, since it never involves the members in anything that it does, but it was going to lose all this money. So it had like these dollar signs in front of their eyes and said, we can't lose them. We have to make sure to maintain them. So a couple of things happened. There was an agreement that the union was going to publicize the fact that there was a debate going on. The people who were in this group that wrote the resolution, the amendments to the resolution that ultimately passed, organized, and I can send people the links, discussions on racism and colonialism. I set up a workshop basically talking about the role of the trade unions in defending the Palestinians. And so we mobilized, we worked for months and months to get people to come, and about 750 people showed up for the different talks that we gave about Israel, Palestine, on colonial settler states, on racism, all of that. And so we asked the union, given the fact that we were all union members, to publicize these events. And since the union said we don't support the resolution, even though the majority of the delegate assembly voted for it, they refused to publicize it. So you have these 12 or 13 people who are on the EC who are making a decision for the entire union, which already voted for the resolution. And they said, we're not going to publicize it. But we forced them to put the discussion in the newspaper, in the Clarion. But the way that they put the stuff in the Clarion was that they put more of the letters of people who wanted to resign as opposed to people who supported the resolution. So it was profoundly unbalanced. The whole discussion, everything. The upshot is that there was a mandate that each of the chapters at the City University, we have 25 chapters, was supposed to have a discussion about BDS and what BDS meant. And the union has so manipulated things, the EC has so manipulated things so that the only place where there's going to be this discussion, and I'm hoping that the discussion will take place, is one of the more conservative colleges, actually, the College of Staten Island. And that's because a friend of mine is on the committee, the EC there, and he's making sure that this discussion is going to be happening. But it's a school that I work at, that all the other schools, all of that has disappeared, gone by the wayside. Maybe a couple of hundred people decided that they were going to leave the union. We have 30,000 people in the union. I'm on this thing called the Committee for Adjuncts. I'm an adjunct and part-timers. So the vice president, who's pro-EC and anti-resolution, we had a meeting and I said, well, I want to talk about the resolution. And she goes, oh, I'm getting to that. I'm getting to it. So we had to force her to get to it. And then eventually it was clear that the people, the 50 people that showed up, they were sympathetic to the resolution. And so she didn't know what to do with it, but she was trying to explain it away and why we needed to essentially get rid of the resolution. So the upshot of this whole thing is ostensibly the PSC is a peace and justice union, right? Cares about what's going on in the world. And yet the EC wrote a resolution on resolutions, basically saying we are never allowed to do things like that again. But there was so much upset about this resolution on resolutions that it got tabled at the last DA meeting. But one of the things in the resolution was that you had to wait from 1 month to the next. So you can present the resolution and the next month you can vote on it, because of course we don't want to leave the membership out. We want the membership to know everything, be completely transparent, right? So the resolution got tabled. It didn't pass because it got tabled. And we, people in the international committee, the upshot of all this is we wrote a resolution against the embargo on Cuba, right? So we wanted to present that to the delegate, to the EC, and the EC said that because there's a 30-day waiting period and they were so busy, we couldn't present the resolution on Cuba. In the meantime, their resolution on resolutions never came to a vote. And yet they're implementing it as if it came to a vote. So now nothing that the international committee is a very mixture of lots of different kinds of people, many of whom I don't actually agree with. But for this resolution that was going to be against the embargo, which the AFL has not opposed, they support the embargo. We wrote a resolution saying that the AFL, that we have to bring this up in the AFL to get them to change their attitude about supporting the embargo, but we couldn't even bring it up because at this point, given what happened with the Palestinian resolution, there's such a tight fist around the neck of anybody who wants to raise any resolutions that are at all maybe possibly challenging American imperialism in some way or other, is now going to have a difficult time coming to the delegate assembly to be voted on. And because the EC is this, permanent fixture that stands between, anybody who raises a resolution and the delegate assembly, which tends to be somewhat to the left of the EC, that they're not going to get an opportunity to discuss the issues that in fact the membership is raising. So this whole this resolution on Palestine has not only driven the Zionists mad in my union, but has also, encouraged them to clamp down harder on any other resolutions that appear to be a little outside the norm. Like one of the things they said was, if some fellow unionists are striking, we can write a resolution in support of them. But it was so circumscribed. There were like 4 or 5 or 6 different things that we can write resolutions on that we couldn't do anything else. So to write a resolution on Cuba and to be opposed to the embargo has not yet seen the light of day. So the union has become, as the crisis in American capitalism has gotten worse and worse, and the AFL is monitoring everything, the union executive, I'm not going to say leadership, but the union executive committee is profoundly clamping down on any sort of radical resolutions or anything that would make us a legitimate social justice union, because in fact, that's not even the case anymore. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Carol. And also joining us is Elizabeth Milos. As I said earlier, she's a member of UPTE, CWA UPTE, and works at UCSF in San Francisco, and delegate to the San Francisco Labor Council, and her local state was a statewide local passed a resolution, and she presented it at the CWA convention. Welcome.
I'm a union member of UPTE, University of Professional and Technical Employees. I'm a healthcare interpreter out of the University of California, San Francisco. My union UPTE passed a resolution. Actually, it was the Peace and Justice Committee that passed the resolution on Palestine, in support of Palestine, in support of BDS, stopping aid to Israel, as well as the issue of the Israeli bonds. And then it was presented to the executive committee, and it was passed on June 2nd. June 2nd. During this period of time, there was also a lot going on in San Francisco. The UESF Delegates Assembly of United Educators of San Francisco had also passed a resolution on May 19th that was causing a lot of news around, and it was very important I felt it was very important for our union to also pass our resolution to also support the UESF. So from the get-go, we at the Peace and Justice Committee had talked about bringing a resolution, similar resolution, to the CWA Convention. It was either going to be the same resolution or another one, but it was going to be one that was basically the same content regarding the Israeli bonds, the stopping aid to Israel, and BDS. During this period of time between June 2nd and October, which is when the CWA convention happened, we also got together with a group of delegates from the San Francisco Labor Council. I had been a newly assigned delegate to the Labor Council from my union back in April. And we presented the resolution on June 14th. It was not the same resolution that we had done from my union, but it was one that had been drafted by basically a group of about 20 different delegates. In particular, a couple of us, but then it was signed by about 25 delegates. The one we presented to the San Francisco Labor Council did not contain the Israeli bond issue, because the other delegates felt that we were going to get sidetracked in that issue, and it was going to immediately be completely dead on the water, basically. The issue of BDS in and of itself was going to be difficult as well. When we presented it, immediately it was basically no debate whatsoever. The person who presented it, Alan Benjamin, gave a short presentation about it, and the minute we started having any kind of discussion, one of the members of the executive committee from Local 87, who has been an APAC person, publicly recognized APAC person through the media, she voted to table, and then it got sent to committee. The committee, at the beginning, we had had several meetings with the different delegates henceforth, and we had discussed whether or not to participate in that committee. Unfortunately, one of our members of our group of delegates decided that it was important for him to participate in that committee, and the other member reluctantly joined that, but with a mandate from us saying that unless it contained either BDS or stopping US aid to Israel, then he was going to leave the committee and not continue with that. Well, unfortunately, there was also personal issues because he was having some health issues, so he could not attend the first meeting of the committee. They were supposedly gagged, according to the other member of our group, who said that they couldn't really talk about what had been discussed at the committee and nobody could discuss it. Then all of a sudden we hear in the news one of the members of that committee, and also from the particularly from the building and trades, who was anti-BDS, he immediately spoke in an article that came out with Jewish Weekly saying BDS is off the table. In other words, he was violating the same rule that they had established themselves of so-called gag rules. And he was unilaterally making that statement, saying that BDS was off the table, when in reality it's up to the delegates assembly to have that. This happened after the July meeting that we had, because in July meeting we're still supposed to figure out that in July they had not had the opportunity to meet that committee yet, so there was no discussion regarding that. But we were hoping that by August, we were also hoping in July that the newer delegates of the United Educators of San Francisco would be sworn in, the majority of whom were supporters of this Palestine resolution. And we were hoping that they would be able to sworn in July. Unfortunately, when the committee was created by the executive committee, they had put one of the members of the executive committee, who was a representative of UESF, who was pro-Israel, as chair of this committee. She, however, was no longer a delegate, an elected delegate, but according to the different rules of different unions, I guess they still allowed her to complete her term in the executive committee position. So she retains the seat as the chair of this committee. The newer delegates were never sworn in July. I don't want to make any assumptions as to why, but I believe there was some internal struggling going on, whereby they might have decided to wait until the following month to come in. So the following month came in August, and there was no quorum in August. And this is something that has happened before. I remember going to the Labor Council meetings even as a guest, when I would show up as a guest for the Social Justice Committee, Social and Economic Justice Committee, that many times the Building and Trades would not show up if they didn't like what was on the agenda. And the Building and Trades usually have been have played a very reactionary role in our Labor Council with regard to many issues, not only Palestine, but with regard to police brutality and other issues like that. Well, in August, there was no quorum. In September, the executive committee decided unilaterally to cancel September's meeting, even though they could have done it for another week or another day of the week, but because of the recall election that was happening. So they canceled September. Then October came about, and there was no quorum for October either. But we received information regarding the executive committee. By that time in September, between September and October, we had received word that the AFL-CIO had sent a letter to the Labor Council saying that we didn't have any standing, that the Labor Councils cannot make any decisions on international issues on which they have made a decision about. When we were going to be at the October meeting, we were very upset about that. We were planning on talking about that issue, but there was no quorum. At the time, also for the October meeting, there was going to be another resolution on Puerto Rico, on the privatization of Puerto Rico and the IBW role in taking over and basically scabbing the workers of Puerto Rico who were against the privatization, and who basically started working with and reached an agreement with Luma, the private company that had taken over the electrical grid in Puerto Rico. So there was also some internal struggle going on there, and the Building and Trades did not want to, they just didn't show up. So we didn't have quorum in October. During this period of time, we have been regularly meeting, and with a smaller group of the delegates that had originally signed on. Unfortunately, we could not get any members of the UESF team to come on. You know, we really need to have a very straightforward conversation with what is the role of the left within the union movement, because I have seen this too often, even within my own union, that there are members of left organizations who talk really pretty outside in the streets, but when it comes to actually presenting the issues in their own labor unions, in their own conventions, they step back, they take a step back. They don't want to take the heat. The CWA resolution that I presented because we were not meeting at the Peace and Justice Committee. There was the chair was, had not communicated until the last minute. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna bring forth a resolution to the CWA, which was, a very heavy one. In other words, it was a 3-page one with lots of footnotes. It wasn't the same one from my union, but it contained the same basic issues, which was the Israeli bonds, the BDS, and stopping aid, but also included a lot more information about what had been going on since that our resolution had been passed on June 14th and on June 2nd. So I felt it was more of a complete resolution, and it also contained things that many people around the country don't realize, regarding the actual support among the Jewish left of Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, among others. And also the support within there was the Colorado Washington State Council, CWA, who also passed a resolution in support of Palestine as well. And the newly organized code workers, Google workers, Jewish group within Google, who's also in support of Palestine as well. So those informations that are from within CWA, I felt was necessary to get out. I really did not expect it to pass, but I felt that it was going to be important to present all the issues and take advantage of that as a really good educational opportunity if it could get past the resolutions committee. I really didn't expect it to get past the resolution committee either, but I wanted to then bring it to the floor anyways. I was willing to bring it to the floor, on my own, even with whatever it takes. The resolution that I presented, that I tried to present, of Palestine resolution that I tried to present, was the chair of the resolutions committee presented an objection immediately for consideration, and he said it was inflammatory and it was highly controversial and this. But the interesting thing was the original denial from the resolutions committee was that they could not support this resolution because they had business or global, they had common business of global industry concern with Histadrut. CWA has common business of global industry concern, which I assume it's probably, electronic, maybe surveillance or, technology. That's what I assume that's probably the area where they might have global industry concern. The interesting thing that happened at the CWA convention, at least what my role was in terms of the issue of this AFL-CIO, although this is not necessarily related to Palestine, was the CWA tried to, they presented a resolution called the Eduardo Diaz Worker-to-Worker Solidarity Fund, where they were bringing forth an actual resolution where they even named this guy named John Bernin, who was one CWA president, who had been one of the originators of AIFLD, the USAID. Okay, so this was like a new rehashing of so-called worker-to-worker solidarity against authoritarian regimes who are trying to form unions, and they included Cuba along with Philippines and Colombia in the same sentence as Philippines and Colombia. So I felt it was this happened before I was able to present the resolution on Palestine, and so I felt at that moment that as a strong Cuba supporter and against the embargo, I felt it would be a good opportunity. First of all, I wasn't going to be able to change that resolution at all. I knew what that was about, but I felt it was really important, number one, to try to get the name Cuba, the word Cuba, striked out of it, number one, use that opportunity to talk about the embargo, and at the same time to expose the AFL-CIO for its roles in Latin America, in Chile, and in trying to destabilize governments. So I did it. I spoke for 5 minutes and I presented this statement. They were not happy at all with that at all, which basically called on the CWA to call on the AFL-CIO to renounce its imperialistic and its interventionist history, and in particular bringing forth again the resolution that had been brought forth by Washington State, which was something to the effect of the AFL-CIO, it's time to clear the air of AFL-CIO foreign policy abroad. So that I brought that to light. That resolution, I mean, my motion to strike the Cuba part of that resolution did not pass because of the fact that the one member from another local in CWA said that Cuba, that they supported their Cuban workers and things like that. And so they felt that Cuba was still a dictatorship. And but then somebody from the News Guild presented an alternate amendment saying to get rid of all of the names of the countries there. And so that resolution passed. In other words, getting rid of all the names from that resolution. So to some extent, it was an opportunity to denounce the AFL-CIO and to talk about the embargo, which I felt was worthwhile. So since then, we were basically adjourned just 30 minutes into the meeting. They used the time to bring in the new UESF and other delegates from the other unions to swear them in, because the other delegates were probably raising hell saying, hey, what's going on here? You guys aren't getting quorum, we can't get in. That was probably the reason why they did that. They also had somebody from Local 39 talking about the Amazon issue and the Southeast Alliance, which was also going to be brought up because there was nothing in the Labor Council Executive Committee report that stated without a doubt that they would not support Amazon coming in unless there were union jobs. They were talking about community benefits, but they were not a community benefit agreement, but they were not talking about an actual stand by the Labor Council of not allowing Amazon in here into San Francisco without actually making sure that they were union jobs. And so that they had allowed that person to speak for a little while, and there was that particular time there was also this Zoom meeting. There was also this Zoom meeting that that supposedly people were going to be calling into, but we weren't even given a time to even know more about it to even do that. They announced, the Labor Council announced that Zoom meeting one day before, no time to mobilize anybody to support workers at that Amazon Zoom meeting. And then immediately when they voted to make in-person meeting for next time, to make it an in-person meeting, which we had decided that was going to be the delegates assembly of going to be deciding each time, because the pandemic was in flux at the time that we had decided back in July. And they brought in all their people, and they were able to get a 2/3 vote to make the following meeting an in-person meeting without allowing any discussion. It was only one discussion for it and call the question, even though I had already put myself on stack to speak against it or to amend it. I wasn't even allowed to amend it. I wasn't allowed. It was like a parliamentary abuse on steroids. And then they voted to adjourn. They immediately voted to adjourn. And I said, wait a minute. I challenged the chair. I said, I'm challenging the chair, the decision of the chair. You are, not allowing the members to have a vote, to have, opposition, to present an opposition to, no, there's not debatable. It's not debatable. Not. So we were adjourned, basically. It was an issue of parliamentary abuse on steroids. That's what it was. So now we had a meeting, a small meeting among certain people within the delegates, but we're still having difficulty getting, some kind of a consensus regarding, figuring out what to do about this. First of all, the issue about the AFL-CIO overreach is very worrisome. The other issue is of how they behaved, and I think I'm basically proposing that we change the executive committee completely. Just try to work towards an elections that would change that would get rid of the officers. That's, of course, I'm probably dreaming, but I'm trying. I think it would be worth trying, basically. So that's the issue.
Thank you, Lisa. That struggle continues, obviously. Our last speaker is Professor Rabab Abdulhadi, and she is the director of the AMED program at San Francisco State University, Arab Muslim Ethnicities and Diasporas program. And she has been fighting to protect the program. She was brought to the university to develop that program, but ever since she's arrived, the promises that were made to her about the program have been not kept, and the students have been under attack, terrorized, the students and faculty, with posters and other things by the Zionists. And this attack continues, so including the censorship by Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. So welcome.
It's really nice to see some of very old comrades, Stanley. We know each other for a very, very long time, and I knew people as well, Lisa and Steve and others. Everybody knows the Arab and Muslim Ethnicity and Diaspora Studies program that I was brought to build in 2005-2006. It was at the Center for Arab American Studies at University of Michigan. I was very excited about San Francisco State because it had the 68 strike. And we thought that we would actually be able to implement that. And one of the things that was very exciting for me, this was a program that actually could go beyond only the whole question of kind of domesticated Arabness, Muslimness, and to actually talk about all the issues, bringing up the indivisibility of justice and thinking about all of these issues together. And so I came in with that vision, and 15 years down the line, it's now 2021, 2007. We have a program, we have an academic program. We have 22 courses that are all fulfill general education electives. The students are very much interested. It's the only program that does so at San Francisco State or throughout the 23 CSU campuses. We have academic programs, we have a minor, we have the courses, we have really great, amazing graduate students who graduate and go on to do amazing careers. We have a collaboration with different groups. We have the only agreement that San Francisco State has with any site in the Arab and Muslim world, with An-Najah National University in Palestine. We have the Edward Said Scholarship. The students have been able to create the mural, public mural, Palestinian cultural mural, honoring Edward Said in accordance with the other murals at San Francisco State and in accordance with San Francisco Bay Area. The whole question of the murals and questions of honoring the struggles and so on, it was also a very big struggle. And we also are working towards a study abroad in Palestine, kind of like taking students and so on. We've applied. We've actually just got turned down again by the university over technical issues. Last time they got us to the last point, and then they canceled it at the last point. And they actually applied disparate treatment between how we were applying and how the program that they have study abroad in Israel has been conducted. We actually have multiple delegations to Palestine. One of the last ones was in 2018. It was the Teaching Palestine project, in which we collaborated with universities in Palestine of it. The one before was in 2016, where it was the first US prisoner labor and academic delegation to Palestine. It wasn't the first labor, it was the first prisoners. And we were going to go to Al-Quds University to attend the Abu Jihad Museum for Prisoners Affairs, except Al-Quds University workers were on strike and teachers on strike. So we weren't going to cross the picket line. And it was very unfortunate because we have all these prisoners, former US prisoners and former leaders of the US prison movement, who really wanted to actually be able to see this museum that has at least 100,000 pieces of work with prisoners, but we weren't going to cross the picket line, so they didn't get to see it. Instead, the people they came to us to meet with us. We do open classrooms. If people do not know about that, we actually probably is the only thing that we're able to do now. Because what happened throughout all these years is that the Zionist groups in San Francisco, Bay Area, and nationally have really waged a very strong attack to crush the program. Part of it has to do with silencing any Palestinian narrative, as you all know. Part of it has to do, as they're doing in Palestine right now. Israel is actually delegitimizing, trying to criminalize any Palestinian voices and so on, because Israel, I mean, honestly, even though they are gaining on the ground and they're one of the biggest forces in the world, they are unable to actually establish the narrative that Israel has a legitimate concern and Israel is the underdog. It's not working. It used to work in the 50s. It used to work even in the labor movement. It doesn't work anymore. So they have a very big crisis. So one of the ways to respond to actually silence voices, crush people, penalize them, to apply McCarthy style tactics. And this is what happened with me in particular. Also, me and my students have been subjected to really vicious campaigns by David Horowitz, by the Canary Mission, by Campus Watch, targeting every single thing we're doing. I mean, there isn't anything we do, we breathe, they come up with it to attack day in and day out. And the Lawfare Project, which is the Israeli so-called legal arm of the Israeli pro-Israel community, which is part of the Israel lobby industry, I call it, and I actually say industry specifically, because it's really important to think about the material basis of it. That is not just kind of like wishful thinking of thought or whatever. It's actually about an industry that's crushing, that's very right-wing, that's very much connected with all these white supremacist, right-wing, anti-labor, neoliberal programs and so on. They sued us and we won. We actually, the judge declared dismissed with prejudice. We smashed them. They never say that. When they come online, they say, oh, we sued Rabab Abdulhadi. Yeah, you sued, but you lost. But they never actually say that. But they also put up posters. They've been intimidating. They've sent me several death threats. I've had voicemail on my office mail saying that Muslims will die, Jews will live. I've had very, very nasty. I mean, if I show you the language is actually quite vile, but a lot of it has to do kind of like reproducing the racist thing about, calling me a turd, saying that, the Christians are going to win and so on. The Israeli army is going to win. I mean, every single trick in the book, you have it. It's right there. It doesn't even need subtext to organize. So this is part of shutting down, but also the other aspect of it is shutting down the program, because the program is an institutionalized program that realizes what we call the spirit of 68. The students strikers in 1968, who rose led by the Black Student Union, Third World Liberation Front, they had amazing labor support, they had support from the faculty. I mean, it was a real coalition coming together, demanded decolonizing of the curriculum, demanded that the university open its doors. So the university is not locked to students who are paying tuition. And actually, many of us advocate for free education, not only for students being able. And this is part of the problem that the university has with us, is that we say anybody who wants to come to our class is more than welcome. We're not going to actually stop people at the gate because they're not paying tuition. We've had multiple conflicts with the university, including when the university wanted to pass what they called exclusive foreign right contract for Coke and Pepsi. So we actually went and struggled against it with our colleagues. We have been very much part and parcel on the front lines with our union colleagues at the university. We have, my students and I have been targeted and have been actually intimidated by the university and by the Zionist groups and so on. Now the university has announced the partnership with the Academic Engagement Network, which is a very right-wing pro-Zionist group that was set up by the former chancellor of the UC system, Mark Yudof, and the executive director is this woman, Ilman, at Syracuse University. And their basic raison d'etre is to target anybody who speaks up for, especially in the academy. I mean, and especially they're targeting faculty. There are other groups like the Canary Mission that's targeting students. I mean, we have all of them, the Amkha Initiative, every single one of them, and the Bay Area, which is supposed to be one of the most liberal places and so on. The leadership of the mainstream leadership of the Zionist community, not the Jewish community, is very much in bed with the Israeli government. They constantly host officials of the Israeli government, of the Israeli military. They host Israeli soldiers. They go to Silicon Valley. They come back. Everybody knows now about the NSO scandal, which is the Israeli software company that has been spying on all the activists, including the 6 human rights organizations, Palestinians, and so on. One of the things that we have been doing, and I think it's really important to think about that. On one hand, the repression has really risen to the point that they actually really would like for me to go away. I mean, this is basically really the end of it. But the other aspect of it is that they reduced the program, which was supposed to, at least at the beginning, when I started, just start with 3 faculty members. It was part of my contract. And I was thinking, okay, we'll start with 3 and we were going to build the department because that's what you wanted me to do. Now I've been and the university president canceled the searches in 2009. In 2010, 2011, they eliminated the funding for the other 2 faculty lines. They eliminated the funding for the program. So now the program has 0 funding, 0. There is no funding from the university, institutional funding. I'm 1 faculty member. Our courses have been slashed by 60%. So any courses, and they use the pandemic as a way to create facts on the ground. I mean, very similar to what Israel is doing to crush that. The good news, this is kind of the repression that I'm talking about. And it's really been really rough. I mean, including the whole criminalization last year, targeting me and my colleague, Kinakawa, telling us that we could go to prison by the provost if we actually continue with this webinar we were going to do. The provost telling us, go find your lawyers on your own. I mean, we're supposed to be university employees. It's just like a pipe breaks down in the classroom. They're supposed to come and fix it. It's not our job to do that. The university is supposed to do that. So they've actually really collaborated, and now they have this partnership, very overt, and they're using the Office of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for that, which is also another phenomenon that I think is actually really problematic. Historically, there have been colonial powers always use divide and rule to kind of like get people from our own communities to fight against our own communities. So a lot of the times you actually don't necessarily see the CEO of the university present, except once in a while. And now even the statement that she published vetoing the faculty rights panel unanimous resolution supporting us last month, she actually assigned it to the head of HR, who's a woman of color. I mean, again and again and again. So they subcontracted to members of our own communities to do their dirty work, which has been a very long time colonial and repressive tool of power. Now, the good news, and I want to just really speak about that, is that we are making amazing strides within our union. Our union, California Faculty Association, just like the PSC, CUNY, just like other, we've actually, I mean, amazing. The union actually is passing a resolution. You will see it Thursday morning. It's a statement in condemnation of the university president's violation of our rights on academic freedom, on Zionism, and on anti-democratic practices, kind of like completely wiping away any kind of resolution, exactly like what you are saying, how the powers that be come in and they use technicalities, use bureaucratic tricks. They use every trick in the book in order to stop us. If this doesn't work, they'll try something else. If things on their own merit don't work, they'll come and say, oh, you're not qualified to discuss foreign policy. You do not know what's going on because we are the experts. And a lot of the time say, what makes you experts? But of course, you know, all this criteria, it's very much part and parcel. And I think it's really important for us to compare how this is happening on a what might be a micro scale with the overall powers that have been going on, including the right wing, including the Cold War, including the AFL-CIO role in supporting right-wing groups all over the world and so on. I mean, always falling short, investing in Israeli bonds. I mean, this is not something, it is really a problem. But one of the good things is that our union is, I mean, amazing. The chapter is passing this, already agreed on the statements going to come out. Actually, they're going to come up with the resolution. And the only reason the resolution is not there because we have to have a resolution before in order for us to present it to the executive board, for people to look at it. So the executive board is not going to make an exception because it's about Palestine to just say, okay, in spirit, we're going to accept the resolution and not have it. And I'm 100% for that. I think everything we should apply rules everywhere the same way. The other thing that I think is really important to note that we have finally, we worked for maybe over a year now within the Racial and Social Justice Council, and we finally were able to create Palestine Arab Muslim Caucus within the California Faculty Association. That's official, that is elected. It took a very long time, and we kept being asked, why do you call it Palestine, not Palestinian? We said, because we are talking about the program. We're talking about a political project of justice. So we have white comrades, we have Jewish comrades, we don't have just Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims. We have anybody who supports justice for Palestine, is against Islamophobia, thinks about connecting this with the US settler colonial project, thinks about connecting it with labor rights, with women's rights, with environmental rights, with queer rights. I mean, this is the way we are actually doing it in such a way. And it took a very long time for the union leadership to accept that. First, we were going to do it in the equity conference last year. And 4 members of the union leadership came up with a statement saying that it is not, that we should not be discussing foreign policy issues. And this is something we don't discuss. And Israel is being singled out. And we said, what the hell? I mean, it was so ridiculous. It was crazy because we're coming up to the equity conference. And we have all these faculty across CSU who are very much interested. And when students are really interested, the staff is really interested. People on a grassroots level in the state of California, the leadership of the state is quite really reactionary and quite right-wing. And let's not forget that, because everybody thinks California is so laid back and so progressive and so on. Let's not have any illusions about that. But We were able to finally, and it took such a long time. Every time we have a meeting with the union leadership, they said to us, you need to call it Palestinian. You need to call it Middle East. And we say, no, Middle East is a colonial term. We don't want to really talk about colonial term. Middle of the East to whom? We want to talk about our own terms. We want to talk about how this is connected to others and so on. So we finally, it was last month, it was passed. Now we're official, part of it. Very interesting, something that has happened, which is really, really kind of similar. I missed the other comrades, but I hope, Steve, you will, when you broadcast it, I'll be able to watch it or earlier. But when you're speaking, Lisa, about the ways that they come up with technical issues. So there was the big statement that is issued by multiple organizations to support the Palestinian human rights groups that have been criminalized by the Israeli government, which everybody tries to present it as a normalized government, and it's really a great government in business, and they pass the budget and so on. But underneath it all, they also passed thousands of units of settlerism. They're actually killing children left and right. I mean, they're continuing, right? So, and there was a statement to Blinken, to the Secretary of State, saying we demand blah, 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 right? So I was elected co-chair. So I asked the union leadership, people who are in our own, the PAM caucus, can we get a resolution passed? And I was told rightly that we haven't passed the bylaws yet. We're still working on the bylaws. So maybe we can actually get a sense of the body. And then when we have the bylaws, we can figure out how do we do it, 2/3 majority, 1/3 majority, do we apply to Robert's Rules of Orders, which we believe are very colonial, draconian, passé, and so on and so forth. But I mean, how do we do it in such a way that we all agree on it? And we actually have one of the biggest caucuses in the union. So the meeting was attended by over 30 people, which is unusual. And our, by the way, chapter meetings, we got 80, 85 faculty that attend. Anyway, Steve, I'm going to finish, so you don't need to be stop. I'll finish pretty soon. So so when we submitted it, and we had 100, we said let's vote. 100% of the members voted to support this resolution. Somebody from the CFA from Northern California comes and says to us, "You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to weigh in on foreign policy issues." I'm not. Very interesting. And we said, why? How is that happen? Is this every single time you have a resolution, or are you making a Palestinian exception in order? I mean, are you applying disparate treatment? And if you are, you will be also participating in discrimination against a particular group of body and so on. So we wanted to get clarity on that, and the person had no standing. It wasn't even part of the officers who are assigned to us. And so we were actually very distressed. Everybody in the caucus is very distressed. But we have a meeting next month. We're going to have a meeting every month, and we are pushing toward our bylaws. We are planning for the equity conference, which is going to be in February. And we have multiple panels and workshops where our colleagues are going to come and speak. We actually have a sense of the body that we wanted to have graduate students join, because there is no union for the graduate students. The California State University has union for the faculty, has union for the staff, but graduate students has nobody representing them. And they are in this kind of weird position and the multi-tier thing that's going on. So we wanted to ask them, at least for now, to be affiliated members so they can participate, they can be supported, we can give them whatever support we need to do, and really do the function of education the way we think education is supposed to be, about pedagogical praxis, the pedagogy of the oppressed, not the way the neoliberal university, which actually our university president is called CAO, they're only concerned about raising money from the donors. They're only concerned with wining and dining. And not anything that they give to the students, all about kind of like making things very glittery so they can raise more money and so on. They don't care about anybody. But we do have a thing, and I don't know, Steve, if you talked about it, but our alumni, SFSU alumni, are actually doing a very big action this coming week. There is a press conference. Steve is also involved in it, and 68 strikers. And I think Lisa is going to be speaking on the campus to actually hold the university accountable and say you cannot be using diversity, equity, and inclusion in order for you to collaborate with Zionist groups that are right-wing, that are white supremacists, that are supporting all these nasty things and so on. We want to hold you accountable, and we want the alumni. No, I'm not an alum of San Francisco State. I'm a faculty member. But the alumni are saying, we want the university to be restored to a social justice mission for which the 68th strike came about, and the spirit of 68. We don't want you to be exploiting the 68 in order for you to say, oh, we're all good and so on and so forth, and keep milking it without actually paying it. The other thing, we also don't want them to actually use our courses. For example, we offer a course on Islamophobia, on Arabs and Muslims, civil liberties, and so on. So they use them in order to add diversity and stir. So we actually want to hold the university accountable and demand that the program continues, continue struggling for it. The grievance, as I said, we succeeded last month. Now my colleague Tomomi Kinekawa also has a grievance on academic violation of academic freedom. The faculty passed unanimous resolution for that. We have another grievance coming up about the universities trying to dismantle the AMED studies program because they really don't want it to be institutionalized. This is what the Zionists want. And when the Zionists say jump, the university says how high? And they're doing it. So we actually would like to be able to hold accountable this public institution and restore it to being public, not behind the scenes, all this kind of wheeling with the Zionist organizations and the donors that we don't really know what's going on. We have no idea. And so this is one of the challenges we're having. We're hopeful. It's a long struggle. We would really like to be able to actually engage in the real work of education, of engagement, on co-learning, of mentoring our students, of supporting them. Unfortunately, these powers that be, as what's happening with all of you, are trying to block us, but we're not going to be deterred. We say we will not be silenced. We're not going to go away. We're going to continue struggling for what we believe in, because at the end of the day, it is about justice. And we are implementing an injury to one is an injury to all. And that's actually one of the best news that I think I can report about where we're coming from our side at San Francisco State.
Thank you very much, Rabab. And I have to say, as a striker in 68, the attack on your program is, I think, to be expected, because you're actually carrying on what we did in 68, which was to have programs and history relevant to the actual struggles going on of oppressed people and working people. So you're carrying on that tradition, and that's why you're under such vicious attack. And also, I think that you may be becoming a delegate to the San Francisco Labor Council. I think that would be from the CFA, which would be a very important addition. I think it's very important that the delegates of the Labor Council hear from Palestinian Americans about what the real conditions are. That's critical. We have to have the voices of Palestinian Americans in the labor movement directly talking about their issues. And also, we have to link up the struggle of American workers with Palestinian workers who face attacks, healthcare workers, the journalists who are targeted by the Israeli forces. They've been killed. In my union, they did mention the bombing of the journalist offices in Gaza, but they didn't really talk about the Histadrut relationship with the AFL-CIO. And also they left out Julian Assange, because my local had passed a resolution for the freedom of Julian Assange. That was left out, but they did mention Khashoggi. So I do think that in my union and the CWA in the newspaper guild, we need to have a delegation of journalists to go to Palestine and report back to the members about the conditions of journalists and working people in Palestine. And that's part of the process. So I think we've had some very good reports, and let's open it up for discussion. Lisa, you got your hand up?
I wanted to say that one of the reasons why I made such a long CWA resolution was and issues that are really not taken into consideration is how is this basically the settler colonial projects and the neoliberal policies have come to a head to a certain point in many different countries. And settler colonial projects such as Israel has had a lot of influence in their police and military training, crowd control methods, weapon sales to countries such as Chile, during the dictatorship, but also now, of course. In Chile in particular, the Mapuche community in the south, the Araucana, in this area of the Araucanía, which is the south of Chile, the Piñera governments and even the subsequent governments that came after the Pinochet, which some of them you would consider that you would call themselves socialists, attacked the Mapuche communities using the anti-terrorism laws of the Pinochet regime. But most recently, for example, it's just a very quick example, the whole southern part of Chile was completely militarized again. They've been doing this several times throughout the years, but it looks like a military zone, like Iraq, basically. And they shot at a checkpoint. They had a checkpoint where people were in their cars waiting to get through, and they were allowed through, and one car went to the side, and it was a child inside who was shot. The child was not killed, but two people were killed. Two Mapuche leaders were killed, and they call it confrontations. There was no weapons whatsoever. It's the same tactic that Israel has used against the Palestinians for 70 years. And also the shot in the eye squad of the journalists in the United States, journalists and protesters in the United States have been shot in the eye. That's direct mutilation. In Chile, it was 460 people during the protests from October 2019 to March 2020. 460 people that were deliberately targeted in their eyes, just like the Israelis did at the land march in Gaza, where they were deliberately mutilating people's legs off. That's mutilation tactics are par for the course for Israel, the way that Israel has been training police force in the United States, not only in shooting of the eyes. All those things should bring to light that it's not tenable for institutions to support Israel under the banner of diversity or under any kind of banner whatsoever, and that in and of itself should be a call to action as well.
Okay, anyone else would like to speak? I want to did say about the history of the AFL-CIO, because the AFL-CIO was actually formed in 1955, basically as part of an anti-communist, pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist trade union federation. They purged left unions, communist militants out of the unions, and the AFL-CIO has a pro-imperialist policy where they are now taking $75 million a year from the National Endowment for Democracy for their quote-unquote Solidarity Center. And the Solidarity Center has been very silent about what has happened with Palestinian workers, subjugation of Palestinian workers, the terrorism against Palestinian workers, and the apartheid state of Israel. And the same happened during the fight against apartheid. The AFL-CIO supported Buthelezi and gave him an award, who was in support of the Bantustans in South Africa. So I think that one of the questions we have to ask is, if American workers believe and support equality for all, equal rights for all, that is not the case in Israel. You have the Jewish workers and you have the Palestinian workers. They have two different ways that they're treated. They're not treated equally. And I think that that is a principle for the working class labor movement. The last thing I was going to say is that the Democratic Party is part and parcel of the Zionist agenda. And just this past week, Kamala Harris spoke at the ADL convention, and she said that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. And they are basically saying that if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic. And that political campaign is what they use in the labor movement to shut down try to shut down people who criticize Israel. So I think we have to make it clear that criticism of Israel and the regime in Israel actually is support of the people. And the real right wing, the Nazis, the fascists who are growing in this country, who are murdering Jews, that is really where the threat to Jews are in the United States and internationally. Carol, and then Rabab. You're on, Carol.
Two things. The Zionists who support Israel, the Christian Zionists who give bucket loads of money to the Israelis, which they helped set up the Israeli state in the first place, are so profoundly anti-Semitic that their philosophy is that once everybody gets back to the promised land, Jews are going to convert and become Christian. And so the irony of all of this clearly is not going to be, you're not going to see that in CNN or any of the others, but we have to put it out there that the real anti-Semites or the anti-Jewish, because everybody's Semitic in the Middle East, are the Christians, right? These Christian Zionists who are giving money to support the state of Israel. The other thing that I wanted to say is that the AFL-CIO didn't become pro-imperialist when they got together in 1955. The very establishment of the AFL was, and Gompers, was one that saw itself as being pro-capitalist, was anti-radical, was one that, you know, only wanted to organize white males who had some sort of skill. It was racist, it was anti-women, it was from the very jump, the trade union leadership, and so it's become more and more bureaucratized over the course of the, you know, more than 150 years when it got set up. But right from the very beginning, the purpose of the trade unions is to make a deal with management, to get some crumbs for the workers, but to stand in the way of workers really rebelling and organizing a mass movement to change, you know, the capitalist society. So, I mean, I think that we have to talk about the very nature of unions, and, you know, while we support them and protect them against union busting campaigns, we have to start talking about transcending and developing another type of institution that's really going to, you know, defend and protect workers and hopefully move towards a socialist society ultimately, because we're all going to be Palestinians, and there's going to be no more planet. And we have to denounce the AFL and the AFL-CIO in every single possible way that we can, and start talking about developing different types of workers' organizations. So.
And Stanley, do you have your hand up? Would you like to speak?
So a number of people mention Israel bonds. Do they know how much various institutions have? Because that's been a closely guarded secret. I mean, I did a study, I don't know, this is probably 15 years ago, and there was some old data about that, but I don't know. You know, it probably is probably is the right of a union member to know this. And I wrote to the AFT, and they gave me the information right away. Do you know if your unions have Israel bonds or other investments?
At UC, when you go into the UCOP thing, I haven't been able to find it. Previously, they used to have the holdings, and in the holdings, they a few years back when I was looking at the oil company, the Energy Transfer Partners and things like that, they did have information regarding that, but the bonds are under the name of the State of Israel, so they would have several countries, you know, State of Israel, say, you know, different states, and so yes, they would have, but when I tried to access information again, I couldn't get it. But you're right, maybe we should do an FOIA and request. That would be a good thing. That would be definitely a good thing, because one of the things we have a problem with sometimes is unions. We're very good at passing resolutions, but in our union, it was the Peace and Justice Committee to which I belong that passed that resolution, and then it was the executive committee. So we had to do some backtrack and make some education as well within our members. But at the same time, there's many unions that pass resolutions, but they don't do anything with those resolutions. So we have to continue fighting within to try to get to some action done on the resolutions that we passed. You know, unfortunately, you see the unions don't have voting rights in terms of what the investments are. We don't have a voting right. We only have an advisory board, but we're not voting members of any pension councils or pension funds.
Well, the unions, you can get the LM2 and the union report, which has a list of bonds. And I think the AFT, I checked, but I think they have $25,000 in bonds. So the LM2 of the unions have reporting of the bonds. Rabab, you have your hand up?
I think there are multiple issues here. One is that I just wanted to say that I think it would be great to have a journalist delegation. I think it would be great to have a labor delegation. I know, Stanley, you went on one CWA, there were a few. I think it would really, really be good to actually have a focused labor delegation also, where people, trade unionists from the US actually go and meet and hear from Palestinian trade unions. I mean, pretty soon we will be able to do more traveling and so on, and we would really love to be able to do that and integrate it in the classrooms. In the present time, as until we get there, I think it's really
A
important.
little hard to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Uh, I'm still suffering from COVID post, syndrome, so I'm kind of like having very bad breathing. So just bear with me. But I was saying also in the interim, it would be, aside from the delegations, it would be really great to be able, and we've already hosted several conversations with Palestinian trade unions, but I think that would be really, really great to be able for people to understand, not only in general, why folks support Palestine, why support PDS, why they are anti-Zionism and so on, to actually hear the real conditions. I mean, one of the things if we're talking about academic labor, what's happening in academic unions? What's going on, and we've been trying to actually figure out something with PSC CUNY, with UMass Amherst, with the CFA and so on, to be able to actually do that, have Palestinian teachers come in and talk about it. I don't know if people remember, they were brutally attacked in 2016 by the Palestinian Authority. I mean, and we had some of the organizers there. And I think it's really important to do that. So it's just like for people to understand, why is this really a problem? Why the Histadrut is a problem? Why Israeli bonds are a problem? So in order to address, the point you're mentioning, Carol, is the whole question of kind of like, nobody's singling out Israel. Israel is singling out itself. Nobody. It's just, if Israel is actually behaving like other states and stops repressing Palestinians and so on, nobody needs to go against Israel. They're the ones who are picking it up. And I think also it's really important. And I want to say kind of like we have multiple classrooms coming up. I'm teaching my Palestine course next semester is going to be throughout CSU. We've succeeded in that. And we're going to be doing actually a major panel, which every semester we do, called Who Owns Jewishness? So we bring anti-Zionists, organizers, people who are speaking from different walks of life. We never can cover everything, but this time actually we're going to get a lot of voices from Israel to speak about that. And of course, we have other classrooms around Palestinian workers, around neoliberalism, and so on and so forth. So I think it's really, really important to do that, because I think part of it has to do with the ways in which people are so intimidated. Because the minute you mention Palestine, the Zionists invoke anti-Semitism, and they pose it as if it's a mutually exclusive thing. But we always say that the struggle against anti-Semitism, the struggle against Islamophobia, the struggle against anti-Palestinianism, and so on, all of them are part of the same thing. It's about discrimination, racism, and racial discrimination in all its forms. And definitely Zionists do not own Jewishness. Historically, this has never been the case. And I think it's really important to have people articulate. Actually, there is a very interesting article, I think it was with New York Times, about Ethiopian Jews and the whole question of the Ethiopian Jews and the whole question of who is a Jew, who's a real Jew, who's not, and so on and so forth. But even aside from that, there is so many struggles in the Israeli racial map, and there is so many struggles among Israelis who are anti-Zionists, who are involved in trade unions. I mean, historically, this has been a very, very interesting history that part of, I think, what the Zionists are trying to silence us is because they don't want these narratives to come out. They have a serious problem with it, because the more we teach, the more we speak, the truth comes out. And the truth comes out that it's not about Palestinians and Jews. It's not religious. This is about justice and injustice. This is what it is, like everywhere else. So they always try to exceptionalize Palestine and say it's about Palestine in order for them to isolate them. Oh, Israel is getting picked upon. Israel itself is causing this picking up on. Stop behaving the way you are doing, and nobody's going to pick on you. I mean, and I think the third point that I want to say is the collaboration between Israel and other right-wing governments around the world, including Arab right-wing governments. So you mentioned Khashoggi, for example, Steve. I mean, seriously, wasn't the NSO, the Israeli software company, who provided the spying software to spy on Khashoggi and his supporters and so on, so he could be chopped up Of course, they don't talk about other journalists, but they were also spying on the 6 Palestinian human rights organizations. They've been also spying on the lawyers of the human rights organizations in Mexico, on the families of the students who disappeared, which is until now we do not know where they are. I mean, again and again and again. And I think part of it is to actually make it very clear to people that this is part and parcel of the collaboration between repressive, imperialist, Zionist, colonial forces around the world. This is what they're trying to do. And for them, the whole question of neoliberalism and capitalism is very important. They would not survive without that. This is not socialist politics. And I'm part of the Marxist section in the American Studies Association, and we've just had a meeting, and we're going to be doing in our next conference, it's in New Orleans, we're going to be collaborating with trade unions in the South who are organizing Black workers for justice and a whole bunch of other people and so on, and actually bring this up because there is also a lot of stigma, a lot of racism, and a lot of not understanding. It's like, oh, everybody in the South is hilly-billy and everybody is racist and so on and so forth. And we know this is not the case. So we want to actually be able, it's our job as educators to educate, to co-learn, to engage in critical pedagogy, to be able, and this is part of the thing that San Francisco State doesn't like about it, because we always say people in the community have so much to offer. It's not only people who have DR in front of their names. I mean, yeah, great, good for you. You got the degree, your work, and so on and so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, there is so much knowledge in all quarters, and we really need to make that available to the students. We need to make the students available to that. And this is what the neoliberal establishment, the Zionists and the university establishments do not want that to happen, because that defies the function of education, as they say, to produce docile citizens who actually reinforce and reproduce the status quo of repression. And I'm not saying we're not the only ones. I think I'm maybe preaching to the converted. This is something that actually we really need to remind ourselves again and again. It's so exciting when students actually realize, oh, I'm part of a bigger issue. I'm part of a bigger project and so on. This is what I really want to do. And I want to actually, at the very least, I want to be accountable to my community. At the end of the day, when I graduate, I'm not just going to go cover my butt and have a career and so on and so forth. I'm going to be part of change. I do, because another world is possible. So I think it's really, really important to actually bring these things together. I just think it's so exciting to engage with Workers' Education Project, to engage with the archive, to engage with the histories, to let people know about what has happened, because these are exactly the narratives that they want to silence. And we can't allow that to happen. We just can't. So I'm just really excited to be with all of you. And I'm just trying to figure out how we can collaborate more to bring all of these things out.
This is the first discussion on the issue of Palestine, the AFL-CIO, and our unions. And I think it should be the first of many, because this struggle to support the Palestinian workers and people is growing, and this history is important, and our struggle today to unite, to educate ourselves, and to link up workers in this country and internationally in this struggle is absolutely essential if we're going to be successful in this fight. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and the struggle continues.